right at the start. Chambers' mind is hit like a truck. Two girls sit him down and tell him straight up that he's starting to become a burden on them. They've been sitting there, waiting on him for what felt like forever, convinced he'd somehow come back with real skills they could use. But it didn't happen. He yanked them down with relentless force. They slapped a fake smile on their faces and swore they'd stand by him through this dawn. Then the two girls rushed up to Jane and clung to him, blurting out that Chamber was about to leave the party. So Jane froze, stunned, and demanded why in the world he'd do it. And then Martha cooked up an excuse right on the spot. For adventurers, skills were everything at 15. Everyone got a skill. And that one gift basically wrote their future in stone. Turns out his chamber skill leveled up and it was a totally useless upgrade. She also said this compared to him. Her fire magic had already surged ahead. And Neru? She'd locked in holy magic while Jane was a hero. And that's why Chamber probably felt like he didn't belong in this party. So Jane leaned in and grilled her. "Where are you heading, Chamber?" But those two girls didn't care about him one bit, and they pushed Jane to stop sulking, drop that boy, and move on from everything that happened. Still, the hero couldn't shake his worry. He kept thinking, how is my comrade holding up? Meanwhile, the chamber on the other side was scrambling to hold its ground, fighting off a couple of monsters prowled in the wild. But even then, he couldn't land a single hit on them. He started to realize this wasn't just tough. It was way harder than it ever looked. At parties, he usually just waded in like a living wall, taking the hits, grabbing every bit of aggro and letting everyone else tear the enemies apart. Then he snapped his head side to side, desperate to shove that thought out because he was no longer standing in the dawn. No one wanted him in that party anymore, so with everything weighing on him, he tore down the path and sprinted straight at the monsters. The monster slammed its club at him, and he snapped his sword up to block every brutal hit. He kept telling himself to lock in and stay calm, no matter what hit him. Calm washed over him. Then, before they could react, he rocketed forward and hacked the enemy down. But the nightmare didn't stop. Another attacker lunged at him from behind, and he slammed the strike back again too. And then he swung down with lightning speed, chopping the monster's head clean off. After wiping out his opponents, he sucked in deep breaths, buzzing with the wild thought that maybe, just maybe, he could pull this off all by himself. Just like that, a new monster lunged out of nowhere and smashed him straight in the face. He finally understood it. This was the very first one he hadn't managed to wipe out for good. He gritted his teeth and tried to drag himself back up, but the monster wouldn't let him breathe, like it refused to give him a single second, and snatched his face in their grip. That monster was fully geared up to end him right then and there. And in that split second, he suddenly remembered those two girls, always looking down on him, spitting out that he was nothing but a useless burden. He gripped his sword tight, but those voices kept clawing at his mind, and he couldn't shut them out still. They wouldn't stop, and kept snapping at them to shut up. Then rage turned into action, and he dug deep, found every last ounce of strength, and slammed his sword down to drive the monster back. The fight finally ended, and the moment it did, frustration crashed over him. Because he'd been one step away from death, just to survive a so-called weak monster, he crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath, because his body had completely shut down and wouldn't move again. As he stared up at the sky, dread slammed into his chest like this was really how he was gonna die. His vision started to slip away, like the world was cutting out at the edges. Then boom, a notification flashed right in front of his face. He'd leveled up, and his health and mana got fully restored. He was completely lost, but then it hit him. His body finally started responding, and he could move again, and the wounds on his face had sealed up like they'd never happened. Dozens of questions were hammering inside his head like, what the hell was that level-up voice he just heard? Why was a glowing plate floating in midair right in front of him? And what on earth did HP and MP even stand for? He had zero clue what was happening, but a gut feeling told him these numbers weren't random. They had to match what he could truly do. And just like that, it hit him. This was his skill, and the level up finally made sense. He stared at the window hovering right in front of him and saw his stats jump. And then he couldn't help wondering if that meant his physical power had leveled up too. Then it clicked. Every time he leveled up, his HP and MP snapped back to full power. And that's why all his injuries started healing. And just like that, his attacks, defenses, and speed all shot up too. Because once he unlocked this skill, everything changed. The thought that he could keep getting stronger lit a fire in his chest, and he literally jumped up in excitement. Because it turned out he could. His skill wasn't a dud, not even close. Ever since that day, he's been mowing through monsters left and right, one brutal fight after another, and he could practically feel the level up hitting his bones, like power surging through his whole body. It felt like the weight of the world vanished. When he swung his sword now, it moved like a dream, way easier than before. And now that his MP finally surged, he could cast brand new magic he couldn't even touch before, and it only got crazier from there. He finally crushed the orc he'd been fighting tooth and nail, and it went down way too easily. He leveled up again, hitting level 4, and it basically proved his theory wipe out more monsters. And his level climbs, that's what it looked like. But later, back in his brand new home base, Rumble, he was finally catching his breath when he realized he could. He couldn't wrap his head around it. His levels had stopped rising, and it made zero sense. He'd been battling monsters nonstop for a while now, but his level was stuck in place. He was stuck, and he grilled his brain for why it wasn't rising anymore. Yet no clear answer ever showed up, driven by pure determination to grow stronger. That thought burned in his mind, and then he crashed into bed for the night. The very next day, he stormed into the Adventure Guild, hunting for that one killer quest that finally sounded like his kind of trouble. But somehow, all of them ended up feeling pretty mediocre. So he leaned over to the receptionist, Nyako, asked for a killer quest, then tried to charm her, telling her her cute cat ears were just too adorable. But that only stung her even harder because she made it crystal clear. She wasn't just any tiger, she was a noble tiger. She snapped at him, screaming that the quests were first come, first serve, something he should have known after months of getting thrown into the rumble. But right then, a loud commotion erupted inside the guild, and he couldn't ignore it. And they dragged that woman out of her party, banishing her in front of everyone. Her comrade screamed that her skill was useless and made it clear they didn't need her anymore. Looking at that chamber, he couldn't help but remember the same cruelty waiting for him with his own party. When they branded him a burden and threw him out, her own comrades were dying to see what could have possibly downgraded someone as useless as her. And then they simply ditched her there. The girl lunged to stop them, but it was already too late. And there she stood, completely alone, tears welling up as she wondered, were they really right about her? Chamber strode up to her and poured out the empathy he had, because he knew exactly what she was going through. Then he told her he knew a better place for her, and turns out, he stepped back and boldly told her to stay over at his place. Every single person in the guild froze in shock the moment they heard it, and the poor girl was crumpling with embarrassment, while he stood there totally lost too, because in his mind, he never meant it like that. Her comrades burst into laughter, amazed she found someone willing to take care of her that fast, and she warned Chamber that he was about to find out firsthand how pointless her skill really was. The divine message had already landed. He couldn't stop wondering what that skill could possibly do. Before they left, the women smirked and teased, them saying the two of them were actually a perfect match, wrapped in those dead, dull vibes. Later, the two of them crashed into a cozy tavern and settled in like they owned the night, and he demanded a round of ale for them to share. But she looked uneasy the whole time, and then he leaned in and told her, "I've been exiled too just recently," because in his eyes, whenever disaster strikes, Ale is the one good thing that keeps him going. He didn't push her at all. He just promised her, "If you don't want to drink, I'll take both." When he heard her chuckle and say she'd drink with him, his whole plan lit up. He then introduced himself to her and told her he was out here on his own too, just adventuring solo right now. The girl copied the move, leaned in, and introduced herself as Ale the D-ranked venture. Chamber admitted he was technically C-cranks, but going solo made him feel basically crank. Then she totally panicked, blurted out that she wasn't even an E rank, and he just tried to steady her before she spiraled. She admitted, choking on tears, that even as a priestess, the only healing spell she could cast was the weak, lesser heal, and that was when she finally broke down, convinced she was completely useless. Chamber got why she felt that way, because in the end, he was just as worthless as she was. Suddenly, Ale started acting strange, and he snapped that Chamber was only 30 points away from leveling up. Stop right there after you've delivered that message. She snapped back to her senses and panicked hard. She kept blurting out apologies to him, even though she knew she'd sometimes speak without thinking because her skill just kicks in too fast. She cringed with pure embarrassment, blasting curses at her own skill like it was useless junk, while he had absolutely no clue why she was freaking out. Then it clicked. He started piecing everything together when she dropped level up and experience points. He finally cracked the truth about her power, what it really was, and he snatched her up in a heartbeat, blurting that he truly couldn't do it without her. At the break of dawn, Martha kicked out yet another member of their party because he was still too weak, even with that useful skill on hand, and he refused to back down. Just as he was about to draw his sword, she struck first, blasting an explosion inches behind him. She warned him, "Next time, I won't hold back," and the man bolted, racing for his life. Naru was soaking up every second in the back, while Jane clearly wasn't sharing the same vibe. He basically told them, "Whoa, you're both being a little too rough." The girls went at each other, insisting they needed far more suitable people for the dawn. Jane stared in disbelief, trying to make sense of how 3 people from the party had already been thrown out. Even when he saw Martha and Naru's strong skills, he couldn't shake the question. Did their belief that they were unbeatable really mean skills could shift someone's whole life that fast? The rank as a party in dawn kept climbing, but a bad feeling wouldn't let him breathe, especially when he thought back to how much he used to love being around Chamber. He caught himself thinking, so that's why everything feels so wildly different now. He flat out couldn't accept it. Dawn had no room for him, and he couldn't wait. He had to know exactly what he was doing right then. Soon enough, Chamber and Ale picked up their quest and barreled deeper into the unknown. As he battled the monster head-on, she surged in behind him and gave him cover from the back. He tore through the monsters and brought them down, and he thanked her for the help, because it turns out those 2 exiles had already decided to team up and run a trial together. It had been ages since he'd teamed up to tackle a quest with anyone, because for too long he'd been stuck fighting all alone. Now he kept swinging and smashing the monster as it fought back. He could feel his power surging upward for real, and he knew it all came straight from his level-up skill. Once he handled everything, Ale just stared in shock at how insanely strong he was, and then showered him with praise. He was over the moon finally getting to light up in battle, soaking up the praise. And right there, from a girl who wouldn't stop looking his way. That level-up skill basically saved his life, because every time he racked up experience points by wiping out monsters, it boosted his power like crazy. As for Ale, her skill was divine revelation. And yeah, it's a little complicated to wrap your head around. Divine revelation spilled the truth to everyone right there loud and clear. And earlier, back in the tavern, she straight up told him exactly how close he was to the next level, and it helped him more than he'd expected. From that clue, he realized every goblin he wiped out would reward him with exactly 3 experience points. And the amount of experience points he needs climbs higher every time he levels up. So yeah, back in the present, he was sure of one thing. Those goblins he just crushed had to mean something. He's finally in the right spot to level up right now. Then Boom Alice snapped, called him out, and yanked his hand in one fierce move. He got blindsided, grabbed the moment, and demanded to know what she was doing. She ripped into him, saying, "Look, your arm's bleeding," and then she stepped in, offering to heal him right then and there with her healing magic. Right when she was about to do it, he suddenly got a message. He'd leveled up. It was the final proof his calculation had been right all along, and he was kind of proud of himself. But Ailey lost it, screaming in pure shock when he saw that her arm injury healed all by itself. She didn't lift a finger. He didn't freak out at all. This was just what happened when he leveled up. But the moment he saw the look on the other person's face, he finally got it. This was his first level up in front of someone else, and now he had a ton to explain. Later that night, as they huddled around the campfire, he leaned in and laid out every single thing about his skill. After he crushes monsters, he scoops up experience points, and that surge of power slings him straight into leveling up and boosting his stats. She couldn't believe a talent like that even existed. And when he agreed with her, she just leaned in and admitted she was crazy jealous because her own skill was totally useless for adventuring. While they were still talking, he leaned in and demanded to know why she chose to become an adventurer, and she shot back that she craved revenge with everything she had. He nearly jumped when she said that, and she leaned in and told him it all began back when she was just a kid. She was the second daughter in a family of 4, born into a merchant household where her parents were almost always out of town. Her older sister, 7 years ahead of her, handled the chores and kept things moving while she stayed at the mercy of the family's acquaintances. One ordinary day, she packed her family up, watched them leave, and then sat there waiting, heart pounding for them to come back. But they never returned, because thieves ambushed them on the road and ended their lives before they could make it back. After she lost her family, they shoved her into an orphanage, and she shut the world out completely. All she could think about were the brutal questions of why her innocent, kind family had to suffer. Over time, hatred seeped into her heart and darkened everything she felt. And that's why she craved the life of an adventurer, because one day she'd strike back and avenge her family. Chambers' mouth went dry, because she instantly knew he'd be stunned after everything she'd just told him. But then, with a smile lighting up her face, she told him it was all over now. That was the past, and it stayed there. Once she realized she was the only survivor of her kind family, she knew they'd never want her to waste her life chasing revenge. And she just knew those villains were already marked, hunted, and going through hell as we speak. So her whole mission was simple: become an incredible adventurer. But then, out of nowhere, she once again started to bring. Heck, he said it was an impossible dream for her. She was too weak to make it happen. Chamber flat out refused to buy that for a second. With a dazzling grin, he announced that the two of them were about to become legendary adventurers together, leaving her completely stunned. After dinner wrapped up, Aile just sat there, staring at him like she couldn't look away. And then she leaned in and demanded to know his tale, why he ditched ordinary life and chose the road of an adventurer. He got so nervous he blurted, "Do we really have to talk about it?" And she calmly shot back that it was only logical for him to share too, because she'd already been talking about it. He admitted she was right, then spilled the real reason he ever became an adventurer. Cut to a flashback back when he was just a kid. One day, he watched Jane slice through an opponent in a fierce sword fight. Everyone stared in disbelief when a 10-year-old outmatched an adult adventurer on the spot. Even if he was low rank, and the crowd instantly started chanting, "That kid's a genius!" So Chamber snapped into motion, kept chasing him down, and dared him to a deadly sword fight. And after 33 straight fights, he still couldn't land a single hit on him. Jane told him to quit already, saying he didn't have the talent, and some things effort alone can't fix. Chamber even admitted she might be right, but he still refused to give up. Even so, he screamed that he couldn't stop. Now he had to keep pushing forward. His one rule was simple: never give up no matter what anyone else throws at him. Watching the fire in his eyes, Jane couldn't help it. She was genuinely impressed and blurted out, "They said never giving up isn't just a choice, it's a talent all its own." After that day, the two of them locked in as best friends, and Chambers swore he'd become the world's greatest adventurer, so big, he'd even outshine that talented guy like Jane. Back in the present, he admitted it wasn't some deep plan at all. It was pure impulse. Aile actually loved his story, and he couldn't help wondering if this is what rivalry really feels like. When she said that, he started praying their relationship could turn into one too. Meanwhile, at Jane's party, one more guest got banished, and he stormed out of the room in full-on frustration. The two girls barely even flinched. They just shrugged him off and called him useless to his face. Right then, Jane burst through the door, and he pressed them for how many exiles there'd been, and you could tell the guy was really trying. But the girls burst into laughter and said he didn't even come close to their standards. She insisted that no matter how hard you fought, without talent, you'd never catch up. Jane then declared with pure certainty that nobody could ever cut him down with a sword. He believed it wasn't just talent that decided the outcome. It was the effort he kept putting in himself. Because even when you step inside a chamber, you realize it's never only about talent. And for some reason, he and those two just couldn't click on this topic. He announced that right then and there, Akatsuki had shattered and disbanded. The moment it happened, both of them froze, then blurting out questions like, "Wait, what? Why would he risk everything when the Akatsuki were already one step away from A rank hell? S rank was right there within reach. And they even bragged they were the best party ever." Jane admitted it could be true about skills, but for him it still wasn't enough. So they pressed him, asking if he'd even picked a new partner, and he bluntly said he could just team up with Chamber, leaving both of them absolutely stunned. But first, he decided to wipe the slate clean and do it all on his own. And just like that, he ditched them. Now they had a whole new mission. From zero, become the greatest adventurer of all. Starting right now. Cut back to the chamber as he sat in a tavern, soaking in the noise and danger. Ale crept up behind him and sent a full-bodied jolt through him like the fear itself had hands. She was back at it again, urging him to take even more sips then. Out of nowhere, her skill finally kicked in, and she flat out told him he was still short. He needed 60 more experience points before he could level up. When she finally snapped back to her senses, he couldn't help but think, "Man, her skill has been saving me more than I ever admitted." He started figuring out exactly how much grind he'd need to snag 60 more experience points then. Once again, he'd fire them up and called him out, and pushed him to drink with her. He agreed, and honestly, he ended up actually. I was honestly shocked at how much she loved to drink. Then the moment he said it, she just went completely silent. He went silent. And then the tears just started pouring out. He panicked, thinking he'd said the wrong thing, then rushed to tell her he meant nothing bad, only for her to apologize to him for breaking down like that. She said it straight up, hanging out and drinking with him was just pure fun for her. For ages, she'd been dead weight for the party. But after that quest now, she's clinking drinks. With him, she finally feels like a true adventurer. Chamber just smirked and told her, "You're the one who pulled me back when I hit rock bottom after being cast out, so I'm thanking you." Meanwhile, she was already out cold, fast asleep, and he just grinned at her like he knew something she didn't. Later, the two of them locked eyes, grinned, and pushed on with their adventure. He was totally stunned by how full of energy she stayed even after downing that much the other day. Right then, he spotted the pack of goblins lurking in the woods. He yanked his sword free on the spot, stood poised, and charged straight at those monsters. As he tore them down, more kept pouring in from right behind him. But that barely even fazed him. He kept driving forward with his sword and kept attacking, while Ale didn't just keep up, she handled it all on her own. And with that, the two of them grit their teeth and pushed forward anyway. After wiping out every last monster, they skid to a stop and grab a breath before the next fight. And Ale was still reeling because that was a brutal pile of monsters they just cut through, while Chamber was smiling like they'd really made it. They locked it in together, just the two of them against the world. Then, out of nowhere, a message popped up. He'd leveled up. And it stunned him, because he finally understood they'd wiped out that many. Then he spotted this super weird icon on the veil, and his brain immediately screamed, "Wait, what the heck is happening?" He just got a message, and boom, he finally learned the secret to the party formation. And he just froze there, completely baffled. He'd never seen or heard anything like it. And when he read the description, it snapped into view the exact people he could team up with for his party. And there was Alice sitting right at the very top of that list. An arrow sat by her name. And the moment he clicked it, a confirmation window burst onto the screen, shooting him a question. "Want me to add her to your party?" He still didn't get it, because technically both of them were already in the party. So he clenched his teeth and hit *confirm. Then it hit him he shouldn't be making this call all by himself. He called her over. Then his nerves took the wheel as he blurted out, would she team up with him? He was. Nerves hit so hard he couldn't even lock eyes properly. Then he locked eyes with her and she just stood there, utterly lost, wearing confusion plain on her face. She said they'd already teamed up, and he practically shouted that she was 100% right. What he really meant was simple. He was officially locking in a team and moving forward for real. Before he even finished the thought, she blurted, "Yes," in the blink of an eye, and he froze, stunned to the bone. "Then you promised we'd be amazing adventurers together." And just like that, she was done hesitating. She stepped up to officially team up with him. Relief hit him, and right then they decided to push forward, no stopping now. With a sharp click on the confirmation button, he locked it in and added her to his party. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, because nothing ever seemed to move forward. So he figured there had to be a reason, like a whole feature had to exist for it. But then Ale snapped up their attention and told them to press on now that they'd officially become a party. He nodded along with her, and with sunset still hanging in the distance, he decided to race off toward the new forest. Once they plunged into the forest, the monsters came at them from every shadow-so chamber tore into the fight, while Ale kept him standing strong with non-stop healing magic. Now that the two of them were finally a real team, he could feel them syncing up perfectly, like they'd been in sync forever. After mowing down a whole swarm of monsters, he swept up every magic stone they dropped. They could cash in big grab it, haul it back to the guild, and walk away with real money. Then, boom! The level-up voice slammed through the air, and this time, right then, Ale could hear it too, and that's what had both of them totally thrown off. Turns out she was the one who'd leveled up. Boom, her HP and MP were completely maxed and fully restored. She had no clue what was happening to her body, or why a voice was suddenly rattling inside her head, because when Chamber realized she'd just leveled up too, he was completely stunned. He suddenly got it when he threw a party with someone. Their members leveled up too, and he couldn't stop wondering if this was the real punchline behind the party formation feature. He tried to rush in and read her stats, but she just stared like, "What are you even talking about?" Right then her stat window popped open in front of her. She froze in shock all over again. As he started digging through her stats, he leaned in and told her, straight up, that she'd leveled up for real. She couldn't wrap her head around it, so she fired back, asking if his skills were really doing that. He nodded like, "Yeah, pretty much," then broke it down for her. What stats even are, and how they keep climbing every time his level goes up. Her eyes lit up as she asked if it meant she'd truly gotten stronger, and he nodded, telling her that's exactly how it works. She was practically overflowing with joy and started celebrating until she caught sight of something even bigger. She'd just gotten a message saying she could finally fire the light arrow whenever she wanted, and she went even more wild with excitement. Back then, she could only use healing magic, but now she could cast attack spells too, and Chamber was just as thrilled for her. Now that she finally got her attack magic, they wasted no time and tore into a real test right away. So she focused her aim on the tree right ahead of her. She whipped out her wand and fired a delight arrow that lit up the air, nailing the shot and smashing right into the tree. The arrow tore a clean hole through the tree, and Chamber's jaw dropped. He was seriously impressed. Ale practically burst with excitement, still unable to believe she actually pulled off an attack spell. But right then, he spotted a bunch of enemies hiding in the grass, and he snapped a warning to her. Fast! Turns out a whole horde of goblins had popped up right behind that tree like it was their hiding spot all along. He realized it was already going to explode into disaster, so he shouted at everyone to scatter and get out of there, now. Goblins were right on her heels, closing in fast. With so many of them swarming in, he couldn't shake the question. Did the noise summon them? Or was this place secretly their turf? They sprinted for their lives as the goblins slammed after them, not letting up for a second. They closed in from every side, like the world was boxing them in. And somehow, the two of them cut through every monster that showed up, taking them all down in their path. but the horde kept surging forward, crashing toward them again and again. A goblin finally lunged onto Vale's trail and snatched her bag right out from under her. Chamber barked at her to dump her stuff fast. She grabbed the bag and whipped it behind her. And just like that, every goblin snapped their focus to that bag. And just like that, while everyone's eyes got glued to the loot he tossed his bag to, the two of them seized the opening and struck while they were distracted to burst straight out of the forest. They finally burst out of the forest, and as they dropped to catch their breath, they spotted it. Those goblins had stopped hunting them and vanished the moment they crossed past the woods. So they turned right back toward the rampage, then rushed to the Adventurer Guild to spill every last detail of what just happened. When they finally got to the guild, they laid it all out to the receptionist, and her jaw dropped when she learned that something like that had happened in the Noi Forest. Then she spotted a second woman lurking by the stairs. She demanded that the chambermaid follow that woman and hurry up to the upstairs. The lady grabbed his hand and marched him up the stairs straight to a room waiting upstairs, and he stormed inside. A shadowy stranger showed up out of nowhere, then immediately bowed his head and apologized for catching him so suddenly. But there was something burning in his chest, something he had to get off it and talk about. Confused, Chamber snapped, "Are you really waiting on me?" And he fired back, saying he wanted to make a request to him. But first he stepped up and introduced himself as the guild manager. Manager Suranui heard it too, and Chambers still couldn't wrap his head around what kind of crazy favor someone like him would even ask. The manager pulled him aside and said Don's hero party was one rank away, and since Chamber was part of it too, he wanted to ask him something about them. Chamber snapped his fist shut, seething with frustration, and told him he wasn't part of that party anymore. Then added that back when he was in it, their ranks matched what he said they were. The whole thing happened at the bank, and then the manager abruptly changed gear, saying he'd heard the buzz about his fresh performances and that they'd been straight up impressive. He told him not to freak out and get soaked in tension. He only needed his help for an investigation request. Then he leaned in and told him the exact place he had to check: the New Forest. From what he just told everyone a little while ago, that force was packed with goblins, and the manager demanded he dig into why they were there in the first place. He also told him to run the investigation in broad daylight because goblins hit their peak at night, so if they went in the daytime, there'd be way fewer of them. The guild wouldn't let it go. Rumors whispered that a king goblin might be hiding somewhere deep in that forest, so the manager grabbed him with a warning. If he ever crossed paths with the Goblin King, he'd need to bolt right away, because that king was a brutal top-tier monster. Chamber quickly realized this easy request was a trap waiting to spring, yet the manager smiled again, waved him off, and insisted it was no big deal, just a harmless survey he had to complete. Later, he and Al slipped back into the forest, and Ale could see the worry written all over his face, so she demanded to know what he was thinking. And he admitted this mission was deathly dangerous, confessing he'd been worried about her too, because they'd already seen how brutal and unnatural this force can be. Then she snapped, firing back, asking if he actually thought she was unreliable. She reminded him they were at a party now, and no matter what chaos hit, she was going with him. He shut his mouth for good, and Ale's eyes lit up as they dove right back into the investigation. Right then, a hulking goblin slammed into his view, and what really knocked the breath out of him was this. It's a goblin swordsman. It towered over ordinary goblins and hit like a wrecking ball, and everyone knew it played as the mini-boss of the pack, always moving with the regular goblins in tow. They bolted behind a bush, and as he laid out every detail to her, they stayed locked out of sight. She stared in awe at how deep his knowledge went, then blurted, "Tell me, have you ever fought one of these monsters before?" He snapped back that no, he hadn't, but he still believed that with their current power. So they grabbed their nerve, stepped out of hiding, and squared up, both of them ready to take on those goblins. Hale struck first, loosing her light arrow like a lightning bolt. She swung and slammed her blade straight into the goblin swordsman's eye, but it still wasn't enough. Chambers saw it coming, so he lunged right after it, rushed in close on the monster, and drove his sword in. In a single brutal swing, he chopped off the goblin swordsman's head. With the leader crumpled, the regular goblins snapped into full panic. Chamber and Ale seized the moment of their confusion and barreled back into the assault. They fought their way back, and somehow, they wiped every last one of them out. Ale patched him up, then practically begged him to stop overdoing it, because this was only an investigation, not a death match. Chamber knew exactly what she meant, but he still pushed for a few extra experience points just in case they crash into the Dalton King, because leveling up could mean the difference between surviving or getting wiped out. So yeah, by day there wouldn't be some huge mob, but if they got spotted by accident, getting backup would turn into a total headache. So he figured they needed to be ready for anything. Ale caught that vibe instantly, then leveled up and set his sights on taking down the Godland King. They pushed deeper into the forest, mowing down every regular goblin that tried to block their path. Then, at last, they stumbled on a campsite. Goblin tracks everywhere, circling the whole place like they were hunting nearby. It looked wrecked and scraped to the bone, and they couldn't help but wonder if some adventurers got jumped right here. Just then, Chamber snapped his fingers, because the guild manager had dropped one last crucial detail into his mind. AC rank party vanished deep in the New Forest, and I told him to investigate it too if he ever got the chance. When he realized people tied to this case were disappearing, rage and frustration hit him like the other adventurers just tossed this nightmare onto his shoulders. Right then, he spots something lying on the ground, and when she snatched it up, she clocked Adelina's earring the second she saw it. She used to run her old party, and the same guild that day kicked her out because of the person she'd once led. As her group pitched camp, the two of them suddenly realized one terrifying truth. Some brutal goblin horde must have attacked them while they were getting settled. Ale pushed to chase them even deeper into the forest, and when she dragged him into this danger, she apologized, because she knew how risky it was. But her heart was set on doing it. Chambers just smirked and told her, like he'd already seen this coming, "I knew you'd say that." He nodded and stepped in to help her track Adeline, then trailed the Gotland's steps, hunting to see exactly where their path would spit him out. Right as they searched the area, he spotted a hand jutting out from the bushes, and the closer they looked, the more it hit them. They stared in horror at the pileup of goblin corpses and couldn't stop asking what brutal force did all that. Then they spotted a blue trail slicing deeper into the forest, and it pointed straight to a cave. The cave walls were smeared with blood, and inside there wasn't a single shred of light, so both of them felt that creeping unease crawl right under their skin. But Chambers seized the lead. Then he whipped out light magic, blasting a glowing ball that lit up everything around him. Ale stared in disbelief, totally blown away again by his own spells. And he said, even if goblins were lurking in that cave, they wouldn't just suddenly attack, because everyone knew light was their weakness. So he shouted inside, checking if anyone was there. Then a voice cut through the air, calling him out and demanding to know who he really was. Turns out, Adelina and the entire crew were crammed inside that cave, hiding like hunted shadows. They looked totally wrecked, and Adele tore over to her at once, asking if she was okay, then offered to heal her too, while Adelina just stood there, still completely baffled about why those two were even there in the first place. So Ale told her to drop it for now, then fired up her healing magic and nursed her back to the moment. After she finally healed all three of them, Adelina cornered her and demanded to know why she kept helping the very people who'd violently kicked her out. And with a calm smile, she shrugged and said it didn't matter to her. She'd turned into an adventurer to help people, and she was simply doing what felt totally natural to her, leaving all three of them completely speechless. Adelina let out a warm chuckle, realized just how kind he truly was, and promised she'd be grateful for that forever. Ale didn't want to sound all high and mighty, so she shot a quick apology to cover it. Adelina swore she'd buy them all a drink the moment they cleared this place, and that promise lit a fire under them as they sprinted out of the forest. But right then, one of her men suddenly spotted something off. Right outside that cave, a goblin mage stood guard, with a couple of regular goblins posted right beside him. Cave skitters in. Yeah, it's a low-level thing, but it's a menace because it can cast attack magic, and Adelina points out the brutal truth: none of us have ranged attacks. They better slip up quietly and stay unseen. But before she could even finish her sentence, Ale snapped a light arrow and he crushed the goblin mage with a single brutal strike, leaving all three of them frozen in shock, because it was the first time they'd ever watched her unleash attack magic. Chamber swept up the weaker ones. Ale laid down cover for him, and her whole crew just couldn't wrap their heads around what they were seeing. The two of them mowed down every goblin in one go like it was nothing. Right then, both of them shot up in levels. Chamber hit level 7, and Ale jumped to level 6. The two of them lit up with joy and burst into dancing while everyone else stared in shock like, "Wait, are you serious?" Their eyes widened, because they'd never seen Ale smile that bright. In that same heartbeat, Adelina realized Ale wasn't the same anymore. The Chamber had changed him, and she was honestly relieved to see that. Chamber demanded everyone follow him because he alone knew the path out of that forest. One of the men spotted even more goblins lurking nearby, and the disgust in him hit a breaking point. He just couldn't take it anymore, so he ripped his axe free and swore this was revenge, his final swing, until the moment he lunged at them. A mysterious stranger slicked into the scene, like they'd been there all along. He tore through them all in a heartbeat, slashing every goblin and even the adventurer too. And the whole group went utterly stunned. The hooded figure unleashed chaos and wiped out every last goblin and then kept moving. And the bolts were sprawled on the ground too. He died right there, bleeding out from that wound. And when it happened, nobody in the group had a clue who he even was, or why all of this was going down. Adeline's comrades urged a break for it, saying this place didn't feel safe for a second, while Adeline cut right in and told him to stop whining like a baby. She didn't want a full-on brawl, but when she saw that hooded guy standing there, sword in hand, it felt impossible for him to let any of them walk away. They had no choice left, so they teamed up, grabbed hold of each other, and fought to find a way out of that place. She ordered Ale to cover the back from behind, and Chamber instantly jumped into the front lines. Then she and Ricardo clocked the perfect opening and they struck, while Chamber forced himself to calm down, reminding his pounding heart that he'd leveled up and was stronger than ever. With that, all four of them clenched up, got ready to throw down, and slid into their spots for the fight. Ale kicked things off by firing a shimmering light arrow butt, but the enemy slipped out of the way like it was nothing. So Chamber snapped forward and crashed in at him, blade swinging in for a brutal strike. Once more, he snapped aside at the last second, slipping through the blow with razor-sharp agility. The hooded figure snapped back and slashed with his sword. Chamber somehow managed to slam a stop to it, but the next barrage hit so fast it felt like lightning, and Chamber knew he couldn't keep that defense up for long. While Ricardo kept his opponent busy, he seized the opening, launched his quick dash, and came charging from right behind. He managed to land the strike, but it still couldn't break through him. And then it hit him. There was real armor under that hood, like the whole disguise was just a mask. But it was already over just as Ricardo was going down. The swordsman steadied him with one desperate last move. Ricardo yanked at his hood, desperate to finally uncover who this mystery person really was. And boom, turns out the thing was a black goblin. Dread crept in the second I realized just how dark it was. Chamber couldn't even believe the thing was a goblin. Then it lunged at him out of nowhere, and he barely dodged as it sliced his face. Bloob flew into his eyes and stole his sight, but the goblin was already lining up, the final blow ready to end him for good. Then boom! A glowing arrow smashed into the goblin's face, right between its eyes. Hail snatched him out of death at the very last second. Even with the arrow thudding into its face, the goblin didn't flinch. Its attention snapped straight to her. The goblin barreled straight at her, and that Chamber's loud cry screamed for her to run. Right as she tried to process any of it, the goblin lunged straight into her face. Just then, Adelina snapped into position and raised her sword, catching the attack like a shield, but it still wasn't enough. She got hit again, and the impact left her bleeding. And with those words, she declared the debt was finally settled. She'd paid him back. Ali immediately offered to heal her injuries on the spot, but she slammed the brakes, because there wasn't a second to spare. The black goblin was still charging straight at them, and she snapped that she needed to look out for herself more than anyone else. Before she could even blink, the goblin lunged onto her straight up, right in her face, ready to finish her. Chamber lunged from behind and slammed into him with a sword attack. He couldn't land a real cut at all, it only nicked him barely. It felt like he was punching straight into a rock. The goblin snapped back to its feet and drove its boot into the chambers with brutal force. It blasted him backward and sent him crashing straight into a tree. Hale's chest tightened with worry as Adelina snapped back to her feet and sprinted straight toward the goblin. She lunged at him with her sword, swinging to end it, and the goblin shrugged it off like nothing, blocking the strike with effortless ease. However, still, she shoved forward and somehow drove her foot into his eye, making the goblin shriek in pure, crushing agony. She cracked up at the goblin, because after all this time, she finally uncovered a side of him that was soft as spring air. But before she could even blink, the goblin swung his sword step, gone, leaving her frozen in shock. Ale demanded why she was acting so reckless, and she snapped back that this was just the start of her pride. As the party leader, she couldn't flee while her comrades were dropping right in front of her. Yeah, Ale was nothing like her. She shoved her out of the party, but still kept using her healing magic to help everyone. Even though they weren't on the same team anymore, she grabbed her final breath and screamed for him to hurry and run. All the black goblins tore into her, slicing her in half right in front of Ale. She froze so hard she couldn't even get a word out, then dropped to her knees. As Chamber dragged himself upright, it hit him this opening was a life or death lifeline for Madalena. With all his focus locked on Ale, the goblin's left side was left wide open, so he couldn't risk cutting it. But he sure as hell aimed for Ale's head, so he hurled himself skyward and slammed down on its head with every ounce of power. To his total shock, his sword snapped clean in two, and the goblin had still managed to rake its blade across his shoulder. Right then, he noticed sickly green flames crawling along the blade of the goblin's sword. The goblin suddenly clamped a fist around his neck and hoisted him off the ground, dangling him in the air. Chamber just couldn't wrap his head around it. How in the world was that goblin this insanely strong? Even after leveling up like crazy, he still couldn't shake the feeling that he'd grown way stronger. He realized this enemy was on another level. Adelina's whole team had already been wiped out, and now he could feel it coming for him next. Then he spotted Ale behind the monster, still crumpled on the floor, crying her heart out. He realized that if he went down right now, Ale would die too. After they kicked him out and left him alone, she stepped in and swore she'd team up with him. Though she barely knew him, she trusted him anyway, followed him into the dark, and that made him determined to protect her no matter what. Then he slammed his hand onto the goblin's face and blasted a light spell straight into it, right in its eyes. The goblin got hit with a flashbang while he scrambled to cover his eyes. The chamber moved fast, slipped behind the veil, and demanded she get back up. The goblin couldn't see a thing, so he flailed his sword blindly, swinging it at random like it might somehow hit something. As the two of them sprinted for their lives, they burst out of the forest and vanished into the open. They slammed back into the rumble, and finally barreled into the Adventurers Guild like he'd fought his way through the gates of destiny. Watching both of them get beaten so badly they could barely stand, Nako rushed over and saw the damage. He was bleeding heavily. She wasted no time and demanded help, but Chambers slammed the brakes and insisted they report everything to Surinway first. Right after he said that, Surinme stormed downstairs and told him, "We'll talk about it later." First, they had to rush in and bandage him up. Those wounds couldn't wait. After the treatment, Serene hustled both of them into a room, and there, they finally bumped into another man. Dingle, Guildmaster of Rumble, stepped forward and told them to breathe easy, because he was about to lay out the whole story. He couldn't shake the feeling that the black goblin they just dragged into view in the forest was somehow cursed, maybe even blessed by a lurking evil god. There was a goddess called Mishi, was the only god on this whole continent who could hand out skills, and then he clarified the truth. That power only worked among humans. Just like humans had their own god, every other race had gods too. And yeah, that even included monsters. People feared them as evil gods, so humans refused to worship them. He was convinced that the black goblin they were fighting wasn't just some brute, it was blessed by the monster god Azitahaka, and that divine gift let it copy abilities like theirs. Once Chamber heard it, the whole mystery clicked. Now he finally understood why that goblin was so insanely fast and brutally hard to take down. Dingel made it clear. This wasn't the kind of enemy they could have handled at their level in the first place. Serenity even apologized for tossing him out there before she knew the full truth. And still, he never imagined it would go this wild. The guild was already begging other guilds for help over the king goblin, and they decided to let the black goblin handle their end too. So he leaned in and promised, "The guild's taking over from here," then told him it was time to wrap up this request for now. Chamber just sat there, staring at the wreckage of his own confidence, convinced he'd blown the mission yet still wondering why he couldn't feel stronger. He was still powerless, and he didn't have the skill to change anything. Enough then, he spotted Ale, still shaking with terror, and his worries snapped into something heavier. She couldn't lift a finger while her so-called comrade stood in front of her and died, and the shame of failing her burned so hard he couldn't even admit it. But he knew deep down that right now he'd hit the limit. There was nothing left he could do. Then out of nowhere, Al snapped his pride aside and apologized to him. It hit him hard and left his mind spinning with pure confusion. She couldn't shake the thought that if she hadn't pushed to keep the investigation going, none of this chaos would have ever happened. If Adelina and the others had stayed locked inside that cave, they'd have survived. But nope, Adelina had to push forward, and everything fell apart. She felt the weight of it on her own shoulders, until Chamber snapped, telling her, "No, none of it is true. None of it is your fault." Then she said, clear as day, that Adelina only got hurt because she was shielding her, so it all came down to one thing: she was the useless one. The second she said it, the whole room froze, like someone killed the noise for one heartbeat. After everyone who rushed to save her kept getting slammed by harm, she snapped and swore this can't ever happen again. Then Chamber leaned in and told her, "If you really believe that about yourself, trust me, I'm right there with you." He straight up failed that fight and couldn't do a single thing to turn it around. Ale shot back that it was totally untrue, he'd saved her countless times, then replied that he felt the exact same way too. He reminded her that without her light arrow striking the black goblin, he wouldn't still be standing there alive. Turns out, she saved him too right in the end. Adventurers sprinted through a knife edge of danger, where death could slam down at any second. That's why they always had each other's backs, because that's what a real party is for. And then, he straight up told them he wanted to be the kind of adventurer who'd throw his life on the line just to protect his friends. Hale was totally stunned by what he heard. He knew the truth at his current level. He couldn't save a single soul. So he clenched his resolve and pushed himself to get stronger. With every beat of his heart, he swore they could both get stronger together. Right then, it hit. His level-up skill came flooding back into her mind, and he just grinned at her, like he knew exactly what she was thinking. He was convinced that once he leveled up, he'd get strong enough to crush that black goblin. Ale also admitted she absolutely hated having to give up. She vowed to get stronger too, so nobody else would ever have to gamble their life just to keep her safe. And when he saw her fist clench, he instantly knew exactly what she was feeling. Of course you already clocked the answer the second they opened their mouths. Chamber shot back that they'd finally close out this investigation request. Seremi and Dingle were absolutely not ready for the way he answered. He shot up and demanded they give him a fresh quest. Seremi leaned in and demanded to know what kind of mission he wanted to take on. And he straight up told them he was hunting that black goblin and wasn't letting it go. That hit even harder, leaving everyone in pure shock. Dingle burst into wild laughter, and the whole scene left him utterly shocked. He loved the fire he brought out of them, and he demanded they follow him right now. He pulled out a handful of keys and started messing with them like he was getting ready to make his move. Ignoring Serenu's warning that those keys mattered more than anything, he brushed it off and ordered him to follow right after him. When Chamber pushed him on where they were headed, he flashed back, "It's going to be amazing, trust me." They bolted down into the basement. As Dingle fumbled with keys, Sir Inui barged in and told him, "This spot? It's the guild's storage room." Dingle was wrestling with the keys like they were cursed, and Surinu stepped in fast to help him out. but rage surged through him, and he straight up shattered the lock. He tore into the storage, hunting for what he needed, and Suri Nui cut in to remind him. There were a ton of valuable treasures waiting in there, but somehow he shut him out again and stormed off to find exactly what he came for. As he burst out into the open, the dust still swirling behind him, Chambers shot, "You good?" And Dingle shoved a sword into his hands like it was an answer. His eyes went wide there, gleaming like pure destiny, was a golden great sword. Dingle leaned in and told him, straight-faced, that its name was the Thunderblade Thor, which left him even more stunned. The second he clutched that sword, he felt its weight slam into his bones, and he couldn't even budge it. He couldn't wrap his head around that blade same size as his old great sword, but it was 10 times heavier, and the difference punched him in the gut. He figured that if this was still the same him from before leveling up, he would have ditched it instantly. Dingle knew that if he tried to carry on like this, that weight would crush him, and he told him the truth. This sword's last wielder was his old comrade, a top-tier rank adventurer, until one brutal day, that monster of a fighter got killed in battle. Even when he knew death was coming, he still chose to gamble his life to protect others, because that's just what fit him best. He was a total idiot solo against a dragon buying raw seconds, so his friend Dingle and the others could bolt to safety. Chamber grabbed him and demanded to know why he was handing over a sword this important, and Dingle snapped back to what he'd said just moments ago. He wanted to become an adventurer, brave enough to stake his life to protect his friends. And he admitted, with full confidence, that he looked just like that man. He ruffled his hair and told him not to sweat the little things, because this wasn't some charity handout. It was the payment up front for the reward. Still rattled, Chamber pressed him. "Wait, what reward are you talking about?" He nodded, then said, "Whoa now, I've got a direct request from Guildmaster Dingle himself. It's a black goblin subjugation quest." Later on, Chamber and Alice sprinted across a dead, deserted stretch of land, and she clocked his heavy breathing and shot him a worried question. "Are you okay?" "Right, because earlier he straight up said that this new sword felt insanely heavy. He kept replaying what Dingle basically ordered, learn to wield it the right way, and yeah, that thing felt heavy in more ways than one. Still, no matter what happened, he pushed onward, training hard, because he wanted to get strong enough to finally wield that sword with control. And for now, he had to face the truth. No matter how hard he fought, he couldn't beat the black goblins. Ale nodded along too, and that agreement was exactly why they pushed this far, to the hunting grounds of tyranny, where he sharpened his skills for the fight ahead. The second he stepped into the place, 3 goblin swordsmen were already waiting right in front of him. He followed the intel to the letter. They launched their assault, and Ale kicked things off by firing a light arrow straight at one of the goblins, while their focus shattered in every direction. Chamber crept up on them and came down like a guillotine, slicing a goblin clean in half. After just one swing, he finally felt it. This sword was heavy. He knew that before leveling up, he'd barely have been able to grip it. And now the terrifying truth hit. The heavier it is, the harder it lands. The sword's true power was about to ignite right now. Now, Dingle's words slammed back into him. This blade wasn't just for show. It only unleashed its real power after a string of consecutive strikes. Thor is a blazing sword that crackles with lightning every time he whips it through the air at breakneck speed. Right then, the second lightning courses through it. That heavy burden suddenly feels like it's getting lighter, which helped him crank his speed up even higher. And that's exactly how it went. Chamber snapped a strike in the blink of an eye and carved another gauntlet swordsman with a brutal slash. The more he swung it, the more it felt like he couldn't stop. The more lightning stacked up in the storage, the more its power surged, like it was charging up to explode. With that final move, he carved the last goblin swordsman in half. So tell me, did he just wipe out all 3 of them? He came barreling in, sprinting straight at him, and he couldn't believe it by himself. He wiped out a whole crew of Gotland swordsmen. Then he grins and says, "It wasn't me. It was this new sword." And as he talks, it's still crackling in his hands. Then boom, he spotted a massive boulder crashing out of the sky, slamming down right on top of them. He grabbed Ale in a flash and yanked out of the danger zone before it could hit them. At first glance, it looked exactly like nothing but a plain old rock. Then they stared at the rock up close, and Chambers snapped, "Yeah, it's about time we showed up." And boom, standing right there was the Dublin leader himself. Ale asked if this was the mission for once, and he nodded yup. This was it. Normally, one goblin swordsman charges in to lead a bunch of ordinary goblins, but when you see multiple goblin swordsmen working together, that means a bigger boss is lurking behind them all. He'd ordered Nyako to hunt down and report back on the exact location. Now the results were in, and their predictions hit dead on. The Galvan leaders were brutal, and he figured that meant one thing: fight them now, farm the experience they drop, and level up as fast as possible. So the two of them steeled their nerves and got ready to take down the Gotland leader. Ale barely caught her breath at how massive it was, while Chambers shoved the plan forward and ordered her to keep it distracted so he could slip in and take it down. She kicked things off by firing a glowing light arrow that, the blade connected with the leader's eye at the exact moment he was about to swing his sword. The monster slammed its fist into the ground, and they scrambled back, catching their escape before it struck again. Chambers snapped back a step, then exploded forward, sprinting straight at it. He couldn't land a fatal blow at all, so the best he managed was slicing straight through the goblin leader's skull mask. Then it lunged forward and swung a brutal fist straight at him, but he slipped past it at the last second, then crashed back into the shadows to plan his next strike. That monster was huge and swinging with everything it had, keeping him stuck at a distance. So yeah, because that's exactly what happened. He decided to switch it up and slammed his sword into a charged-up state. Dingle had warned him about an ultimate attack, and now it was right there, roaring for its moment. Once the sword flooded with lightning at full power, it unleashed that raw energy straight at the enemy chamber. And with a fierce slash, he swung his sword. He slammed forward, and in that one single strike, all the built-up energy detonated at once. He surged forward and smacked the goblin leader straight in the face. The goblin leader was utterly smashed. Then it crashed to the ground, completely defeated. Chamber nearly froze in disbelief at how brutally powerful that attack turned out to be. It hit you way harder than you ever expected. Then boom, his sword suddenly felt heavy again, and the warning hit him. Dingle had told him once the blade spit out all that stored lightning, it would snap right back to normal. He finally understood this. If he ever fired that attack on a whim, it could blow back and end his life. Right then, both of them slammed into a level-up screen and boom, they'd both jumped straight to level 8. It totally blew them both away. Ale had leveled up twice in one shot, and the moment he felt it, he knew those experience points from the goblin leader were even stronger than he'd ever imagined. They cracked open their stat window and stared down at the upgrades they'd unlocked. He jolted when he realized his healing was weaker than before. But with his magic running low, he could only fire it off once, and it couldn't even bring him back properly. Then he glanced at Ali, and she was practically vibrating with excitement as she blurted out that she finally figured it out. She practiced this move called asterisk light javelin, and once she learned it, everything changed. And yeah, this was the dream spell every priest chased, because it was insanely powerful, even stronger than the light arrow. She burst with joy, feeling her power surge, and declared she could finally step in and do more in the fights. When she said that, Chambers' gut told him she was clawing for power, trying to slam her way back to the top. Then he pushed the idea right away. Let's swing back to Rumble for a bit. They'd already wiped out the boss in that area, so grinding on puny enemies wasn't worth the time, and he insisted they shouldn't sprint into it from the start. Lately they'd been stuck on the edge, so they all needed a real breather, and Ale agreed without hesitation. Later, when he finally dragged himself back to the Adventurer Guild, the whole place went silent because he walked in with the goblin leader's head. He held up the magic stone he'd won after crushing it, then pushed to trade it in. But Naka was still reeling and demanded to know how he even brought down a Galvan leader with his rank. Then he just shrugged and said it was all the payoff of their hard work. She went to work, but that wasn't what she wanted to hear at all. So the two of them sank down together and grabbed a drink, and Al admitted it had been way too long since they'd last drank. Rank couldn't stop herself from wondering what they'd do next because the goblin leader was already dealt with, and he told her to back off and trust him, saying he'd figured out exactly where their next move was headed. He told her to chill out, grab her drink, and enjoy it for now. The very next day, the two of them shot back to the exact same patch of the hunting grounds. She demanded to know why they'd returned after they already crushed the goblin leader, and he snapped back that the whole reason was exactly that. And just like he said before, goblins usually hunt in packs, but their leaders never team up because every goblin boss runs its own little crew solo. So yeah, because of the pack's pull, goblin leaders were basically stuck in non-stop territorial brawls. So basically, after they wiped out the leader who was ruling that whole area, they finally had control. Just when you think it's done, another one shows up and starts carving out more territory. Right then, Chamber snapped his head around. Something behind him was making a sound. The moment he spun around, a goblin leader stood there, flanked by a whole gang of goblins. Right on cue, just like he'd expected. Then out of nowhere, suddenly, just as he thought he was safe, another leader slid in from right behind him. He wasn't even shocked to see them all converging right here. He took it as his chance to wipe them out before anyone could think twice. The two of them unleashed every trick they had, swinging with everything in their bones, and they steamrolled both goblin leaders and wiped out their packs too. After the fight, they stood shoulder to shoulder. Boom. The result chamber and the ale both hit level 12. Meanwhile, back in the city, things are about to explode. A full-on commotion exploded everywhere, and boom, turns out those goblins slipped right into the city and vanished into the crowd. Sarah Nui stayed parked in his office when strange noises crawled in from outside, and his mind started racing. What on earth was happening out there? Dingle, on the other hand, barely caught a thing. Right then, Nako burst into the office and blurted his report too. Right in front of them, that pack of goblins was wreaking havoc through the streets, leaving both of them totally stunned. Dingle snapped at her for the details, and she shot back fast, even with the D-ranked adventurers fighting like mad. A goblin leader was still in the mix, throwing everything off while Sir and me still couldn't wrap our heads around why goblins were tearing through the city. Dingle pressed her, asking why no higher-ranked adventurers were stepping in. Because D-rank teams had zero chance against a Baldwin leader, and she shut him down with a blunt. It's not that simple. After the Black Goblin incident, the top-tier adventurers scattered off to fresh missions, leaving only a handful of solid, mid-ranked fighters behind. And Dingle was sure they'd fled the moment they realized they were about to be stuck with that nightmare. Because seasoned adventurers usually had nose trouble, the job got left behind. Only clueless rookies were left to fend for themselves in town. Rage and disappointment surged through him as he snapped at Sir Anu to hurry to the warehouse and grab whatever weapon he could find. Saruni pressed him, asking if he was really serious about this. But Dingle cut in fast. There was zero time to bicker because this was an emergency. Right outside, he caught sight of adventurers scrambling to take on a whole pack of goblins, and one brave girl hurled her fireball straight at the goblin leader, scorching him in the middle of the fight. But it didn't make a single difference at all, and right when he was about to smash her with its fist, suddenly a glowing javelin slammed into the monster's back. It was Ale and the Chamber, and just like that, they finally stumbled back into town. He couldn't stop staring. Why on earth were goblins crawling around inside the city? And then he clocked the goblin leader's back. Injury. One look at it screamed that no adventurer did this. Still, he got the message loud and clear. They had to handle this right now. So he told Ale to unleash that brand new technique of hers. She cast her enchant spell and supercharged it with pure power. He supercharged his sword strikes with the power of light. The Chamber lunged straight for them. Then he blasted the two goblin swordsmen right out of the way, one after the other. Right there, every adventurer froze, couldn't believe he wrecked those swordsmen so fast. It felt unreal. Meanwhile, Dingle watched himself pop open the little gauntlets and power up his sword with lightning fast, clean, and deadly. Seeing him already start to get the hang of that sword genuinely amazed him. While Chamber squared off against the goblin leader, one brutal clash at a time. He kicked things off by hacking off its leg with a single savage, which sent the monster crashing to the ground. Then he sprang into the air and poured every last ounce of electrical energy trapped in the sword into his next move. He drove his blade into the goblin leader, and just like that, the reign of terror ended, leaving every single spectator stunned as he crushed that monster like it was nothing. What? Everyone around him was losing their minds, shouting praises like he was a legend, and Dingle even praised him for crushing it. Chamber couldn't help but grin, because hearing that from him made his day. When Sir Indy finally stumbled back, clutching a hammer that dwarfed him, and demanded, "What am I supposed to do with this now?" Later on, they all piled into Dingle's office, like something big was about to go down. Office led the way, and Chamber laid out every detail of his level-up skill, and the moment he heard what it could do, he couldn't believe it. He demanded to know if he truly leveled up that much in such a short time. Chamber just nodded. Back then, the guildmaster grilled him, asking why he'd spill his secret skill right now. With how powerful he was, Chamber couldn't shake the fear that once word hit the streets, troublemakers would come hunting fast. He just shrugged and said, "I told you guys, because I trust you." And when Dingle leaned in and demanded, "Why do you trust them so much?" he said, "I don't know why. I just feel it in my bones." And that left Dingle and Cyrano completely stunned, speechless. He burst into laughter, thrilled by how brutally honest he was, and even admitted that his judgment about people wasn't all that bad either. And when he stared at both of them, he admitted it was almost impossible not to think about that. And the two of them suddenly got all shy, like they couldn't even meet each other's eyes. But after all that, Dingle leaned in and demanded to know what he really thought about the goblin leader he just battled right there on the streets. Goblins are usually skittish, and they almost never leave their territory because they guard their turf like it's life or death. Chamber nodded too, basically saying, "I'm curious as hell, especially about those scars the goblin leader already wore, because Dingle just knew there had to be a reason behind them. This was nothing like it had ever happened before, and the moment he felt something was off, he couldn't stop wondering if the black goblin was behind it, because that was the only fresh lead that popped into his head. Sir Rune charged into the chamber and demanded if anyone had seen that black goblin bullying other people too. And yeah, he confirmed it. So you can bet the black goblin wasn't seen as an ally by the other goblins, or it was just a full-on rampaging lunatic, smashing into everyone like it didn't care who they were. That goblin leader probably got kicked out of its own territory by the black goblins, so it stormed into the city looking for a new place to take over. If that was true, Chamber would have to wonder, were those goblins really trying to flee, or were they hunting the town? And Serenity admitted it's still only a theory, but deep down, she knows it could be real. Dingle knew they were on a ticking clock before the black goblin's power spread any farther. And he still hadn't heard the worst part yet. Then Chamber and Ailes snapped in sync that they had to close this case right now. After that, the two of them slammed their bag shut, ready to bolt out the door. Niako was freaking out for them and begged them to hold on, because reinforcements from other guilds were about to roll in within just a few days. Chamber thanked her for caring so much, and then he admitted the mission was brutally dangerous, but he refused to just sit around, because if something like that could happen again soon, he wasn't letting it slide, and deep down he wanted to handle that black goblin himself. After that, they stormed out of the guild, and Dingle and the rest could only watch, wishing them luck for the mission ahead. The two of them charged right back into the Forest of Noi, and they pushed deeper into the unknown. They were absolutely sick with horror when they stumbled on the carcass of a severed cave bow. He spotted the magic stone still sitting there, untouched, no signs it had been chewed up at all, so it had been snuffed out just moments ago, and Ale couldn't stop herself from wondering who did it. But Chamber already had the answer locked in, and now he was 100% certain the black goblin was still lurking in this forest. They pushed deeper and deeper, and before they knew it, they were actually swallowed by the heart of the woods, and neither of them had ever been there before. Suddenly, Ala spun around and found a gigantic spider looming right behind her, and it absolutely terrified her to the core. But Chamber moved in lightning fast, cutting it cleanly in half. He quickly asked her, "Are you okay?" She was so terrified her voice barely worked, and she blurted out what that creature even was. He told her it was a paralyzed spider, but that wasn't even the end. Another full group came piling right onto them, and she finally understood. This place wasn't just a stop. It was their territory. Then it tried to bolt out of there fast. And right after, I'll hit him with, "Do you feel it too, like something's off in this place?" She pointed out that since they stepped into this forest, monster after monster had shown up, but not a single goblin had crossed their path. Now that I think about it, even in broad daylight, this forest looked nothing like the one he knew. He admitted something was seriously off, but with no real choice left, they gritted their teeth and edged forward, careful as ever. As they both pushed farther and farther into the dark, twisting forest, they stared in disbelief. Right there, a full-on goblin settlement. It told them exactly why the forest was empty of goblins. Because every single one had been dragged and gathered right here. They were practically vibrating with tension, and the truth was, they weren't out roaming at all. They were crouched inside their tents. So they both agreed to watch things for a while first. With the sun already sliding toward the horizon, he told them to take a breather and they'd swap shifts, keeping watch through the night. Later that night, Al caught his breath, then stayed up, eyes sharp, on watch duty. He felt it in his bones. The sky kept lightening, and dawn was seconds away. But nothing changed at all for the goblins in the settlement. Same chaos, same menace, no shifts. Then it hit him: this settlement wasn't going to give him a thing, until, all at once, something changed. Then his eyes snapped to a black goblin creeping closer to that spot. A black goblin stalked right through the settlement like it owned the place. And Chamber finally clocked it. This whole stretch was his turf all along. Then he spotted how the other goblin was reacting, and it looked just as terrifying. He jolted Ale awake on the spot. She leaned in and asked if something was wrong, and he hissed back, "Keep your voice down." Then told her the black goblin had shown up. The second she spotted that black goblin creeping toward her, a chill ripped down her spine, and her thoughts snapped back to how he murdered Adelina and wiped out her entire party. Chamber could see the fear shaking through her, every single tremor screaming danger, and he blurted out, asking if she was okay. She smiled through it and told him she was fine. Yet inside, she stayed locked on one mission: keep herself together. So he couldn't keep hiding behind safe moves all the time. She couldn't help wondering if that black goblin was the big boss running the whole place. And yeah, he figured that might be it. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Because something felt seriously off. Just then, the black goblin snapped up a tiny goblin it had been hunting that was scrambling to stay out of his sight, and he ended it with zero reason at all, which left them both frozen in shock. Just as another goblin tried to slip away from behind him, he hauled it down too, and every other tiny goblin with him followed the same pull down to the last one. Seeing it take off, it bolted right past him. Him and the other two were so lost, they couldn't even wrap their heads around what the hell was happening. Chamber finally got it: those goblins were gone at all. They'd been cowering in the woods, hiding from that monster the whole time. To the black goblin, there was no such thing as family. Humans and monsters were just prey, nothing more. Ale finally clicked that the goblins they'd spotted in Rumble City weren't just random. They were fleeing from him too, which is why they looked absolutely wrecked. The black goblin was the spark behind every bit of this chaos, and they knew they had to stop him. No delays, no mercy. The monster started backing off, and the two of them ditched their bulky gear and tiptoed after him in total silence. They followed him straight into the woods, heartbeats pounding as the trees swallowed them up. They couldn't figure out where he was going, right to the exact spot. Then boom, out of nowhere, the goblin snapped to a halt and spun back, glaring at them like it wanted to tear their souls out. They clocked it. Someone had them in their sights. Then he surged forward in a flash, charging straight at them with one goal: take them both down. But Ale instantly whipped out her light javelin and unleashed it in a flash, and blasted the monster backward, crashing it deep into the trees. Chamber stared in shock, blown away by the raw power of her attack. She knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the time to celebrate yet, because the fight was still nowhere near finished. The black goblin pulled off his hood, Like a switch flipping now, he was fully serious. As the two of them finally snapped into motion, they bolted and ran for their lives away from him. He took off after them too, and Chambers' jaw dropped when he actually started closing the gap and catching up. He wasn't scared or worried at all. He just leveled up, his speed skyrocketed, and he knew the goblins couldn't catch them that easily anymore. They kept sprinting away from him, desperation clawing at their heels until finally, they slammed to a full stop and just waited, eyes locked on the road until he finally came charging toward them. That black goblin sensed something was off and snapped its head around, searching. Then, right out of nowhere, he crashed onto a spider web. Turns out Chamber was using the paralysis spider's turf like a snare, and he was just trying to freeze him dead in his tracks, but it didn't faze him one bit. He just swung his sword once. He smashed every web blocking his path, and somehow Chamber barely even felt the slowdown. That tiny distraction was exactly what he needed, because now he's fully loaded with his brand new sword, ready to go toe-to-toe with him. He'd been grinding his level for this exact moment, because while he pushed forward, Ale craved revenge too, and then everything hit at once with zero hesitation, he launched himself at the Black Goblin to finally shut this whole nightmare down. Adele fired a light arrow to pull his attention, and Chambers snapped in after it, closing the distance and crashing into him with a brutal sword strike. The goblin botched the block, and the attack slammed straight through. Chambers' blade finally started to feel right in his hands, and he kept his gaze locked as the sword work clicked. Now that he could swing it the way he used to with his old iron blade, same weight, same feel, and that enchant light juicing it, this sword's power hit like a whole new world. His opponent stood right in front of him, and he couldn't figure out what was going through that head. But one thing hit like a punch. Rage exploded inside him as he stared back. The black goblin shot forward and smashed into him, hammering him with pure brute strength. Chamber slammed him in place and reminded him that black goblins never learned swordplay at all. They just blitzed their foes with raw strength and breakneck speed. He just had to match his speed, and then every strike would slam into a block. Because those attacks weren't random hits, they were pumping electricity straight into his blade, and the longer it charged, the deadlier it got. Both of them kept trading brutal punches, never backing down for a second. They slammed into every hit and shut down every attack their opponent threw at them, until, at last, the Chamber seized control and shoved the Black Goblin back with brute strength. That strength blew Al away too, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for one heartbeat. Second, the Black Goblin still clung to his secret technique, refusing to let it slip. That green flame smashed his sword in half the last time they went head-to-head. At last, the Black Goblin slammed his blade down and green flames erupted across it. Chamber wasn't scared one bit. He knew this sword wouldn't shatter like the last one. With that locked in, he launched straight at the monster. Gone in a blink of an eye. Boom! It slammed straight into him, right where it counted. He swallowed hard, thinking, "It's over," as he felt his sword bite down and connect for real. As he whipped around, the Black Goblin was mutating, reshaping its entire body right before his eyes, and somehow morphed into a brand new horrifying form. Chamber barked at all to get back, even as his thoughts spun wild in his head. What the hell was going on? Was this the Dark God's doing? He stared at the moment and wondered, so what do I do now when? Suddenly, the monster vanished from his eyes and snapped into his space at point-blank range, slashing at his face with razor-sharp claws. He barely got the block up in time, but the second it happened, he couldn't wrap his head around it. The Black Goblin had gone absolutely, insanely fast. Its speed and raw power shot through the roof. Chamber was scrambling to shove off every hit, but each strike kept driving him back until he realized he couldn't hold out much longer. So he tried to put some distance between them, but before he even had time to react, it all happened too fast. The Black Goblin was on him like a nightmare, claws raised to crush him where he stood. Right then, Ollie lunged in, yanked him to safety, and blasted the monster straight in the face with her light javelin. Right in that geek's moment, he finally got the chance to breathe, but she warned him to stay on his guard as the Black Goblin came for him again, ready to strike. This time, the Chamber snapped out of the way before it could even connect. He stepped back fast, and then, bam, everything hit him with light javelin. But it did absolutely nothing. Ale finally admitted it wasn't all in vain. His base was bruised and battered, so yeah, it definitely took a hit. So she didn't slow down. She kept battering him and relentlessly spammed those light javelins. The Black Goblin juked every single hit with insane speed, leaving him completely unscathed. Chamber couldn't even guess what he was about to do anymore, as if it had turned into a savage beast and was roaring to life. With no other option left, he chose to fight as his real self full-on tank mode, then snapped orders to Ale, find a gap, and strike while he works to pull the enemy's eyes and attention onto him. He lunged forward with his sword blazing, cutting straight ahead while the Black Goblin slipped his strike and snapped back with a brutal counter. It lunges forward and rips into them with a deadly clawed counterattack. A grim chamber slammed shut, blocking it cold. And just like that, All seized the opening and hurled a fresh light javelin straight at the monster. He pushed forward and slashed the Black Goblin with his blade, and the moment it felt the strike coming, it rocketed back to dodge a killing blow. Then blood started spilling, and, seeing that chamber, they lit up with motivation. If they keep this up, they'll finally finish it. Chamber clocked. And no matter how slippery its moves used to be, it was now throwing fits, and that made its attacks way too easy to read. He and Ale can crush threats at point-blank range and from across the map, and because they'd been grinding side by side this whole time, he could feel it. Every move matched, like they were perfectly in sync. So thinking they finally had the edge, he launched into another sprint straight at the monster. Then they kept trading hits as Ale hurled her light javelin from way out there. Even when it managed to shove it back sometimes, Chamber kept the pressure locked in and refused to let up. And then, little by little, he realized they were wearing it down for real. All they had to do was stay on the gas, keep the pressure crushing, and not get too close distance was the key. And he was convinced it wouldn't be long before it all finally ended. Then Boomit lunged straight at his face and slammed into him. He barely got his guard up in time right when she was about to smash him with her light javelin. The Black Goblin clocked her at once and darted behind the chamber, using it like a shield to hide itself. Just then, she saw the Black Goblin locking onto her with those cold eyes, and her mind went blank as shock hit her like a punch. If it truly turned its focus onto her, Chamber kept hammering it. And the second she finally got her opening, she ripped through the sky and hurled her light javelinica monster. It shoved the strike away with an arm, and in that instant you could tell it was already adapting to their plan. Chamber could feel Ale's magic draining fast, and even he couldn't shake the fear that this was about to run out soon. And yeah, he could tell the whole ordeal was chewing through the Black Goblin's stamina too. His sword's thunder was stretched to the breaking point, and he went all in on this last world-ending strike. They both exploded forward, colliding like predators, ready to unleash the first strike. Then, right out of nowhere, the Black Goblin exploded upward into the air and slipped right behind him. It slammed down directly in front of Ale like it had been aiming for him, and now it's she's the one lining up the shot and going for it. Now, he gawked as the monsters came up close right in his face. Panic exploded in her chest, and she lunged for her light javelin attack. But it was already too late, and she hadn't even clocked what was happening yet. A Black Goblin lunged at her, raking her with its claws. Chamber slammed the mute button on her name and tumbled hard to the ground, and the monster snapped its focus back to him in a blink. And he launched a vicious attack on him. He slammed the attack away again, and pure rage surged through him. He snapped into a counterattack, hunting for one final strike that would end it for good. In his head, he knew one thing. He had to act fast against this beast, because he couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. And he kept the pressure crushing down on the Black Goblin. Seeing Ale bleed out back there, he couldn't stop what was happening. He shouted at her and demanded she rush right now to use her healing magic on herself. She knew it in her bones. Her healing spell wouldn't be able to mend a wound like that. Still, she thrust her hand out and reached for her wand. She raised it toward the sky, heart racing, knowing there was still one last move she could make. She loosed a glowing light arrow straight into the sky. That totally grabbed Chambers' attention, but he had no clue what she was up to. While he was distracted, the monster seized the moment and took control. It lunges in and rakes the air with its claws, carving a path straight into the open space. Chamber seethed with rage, lunged back hard, and nailed a clean hit, then sliced straight through its shoulder. The two of them froze for a heartbeat, and just seeing it told them everything. He could feel it. Energy was running out fast, so it was go time. He had to unleash a full-force assault right now. He swung his blade and unleashed every last spark of electrical power trapped inside it. The black goblin spread its claws and green flames erupted around them. In that exact moment, Chamber's eyes widened. Turns out it still had one last trump card hiding in its sleeves. But now none of that mattered. He just had to strike before it struck back. Right as he reached for his sword, the goblin lunged in and slashed him open with its claws. Blood gushed from his wounds, and he couldn't even process it again. He'd failed to protect anyone. As soon as Ale crossed his mind, he rushed in with a tearful apology, begging forgiveness for letting her down. Then, out of nowhere, he caught the exact pitch of that voice, right in the air. His HP and MP got totally maxed out again, every last bit restored. Just as he started to heal, he had zero clue what was unfolding around him. At that exact moment, he spotted a dead, paralyzed spider dropping down from above, and it hit him. He finally understood what just went down. Cut to a flashback, and the paralyzed spider's Forestale's divine message skill suddenly sparked to life, and she blurted out the exact experience points they needed for the next level. Both of them were sitting at level 30, while Chamber was already busy counting how many monsters they'd have to crush to make it happen. He'll push them to hold back on wasting what they'd learned, keeping their hard-won experience as bare as possible. So if things spiral out of control, leveling up lets them refill all their HP and MP to the max pure lifeline energy when it matters, so they could unleash it as their secret ace the moment things went bad. He even made it clear, no monster kills meant no experience, so they had to hunt in a spot where tiny monsters were easy to see and no one would barge in mid-fight. Ale pointed at that spot near the paralyzed spider's nest, and he immediately nodded like, yeah, this is exactly where we should pull it off. Now back in the present, with his wounds still burning and his body fighting to heal, he thought of her again. Because even in a moment like this, she still clung to the plan. He slammed himself back to his feet, yanked his sword up, and charged the black goblin head-on with everything he had. Blood blasted out of its body as it took brutal, crippling damage, but it only ignited his rage even more, and it came at him like a feral beast. But Chamber slipped through every single strike with lightning-quick dodges. He even laughed at it, telling him those pathetic attempts wouldn't touch him again, and the goblin lunged back at him, attacking again and again. A light javelin slammed into it from behind, straight out of nowhere. Ale popped back up on her feet, fully healed and ready for round 2. And Chamber practically lit up when he saw her. Just as the monster snapped its focus to her, Chamber slammed into it, and even after it managed to block his attack, he kept on pressing forward relentless. He wouldn't let up, and then he carved into it from the side with a sharp slice. He finally admitted it was brutal, yet even then he still wouldn't go down. And just like that, he and Ali stood shoulder to shoulder. They finally made the call, time to wipe this out once and for all. Both of them roared forward and poured every ounce of power into their attacks, and the black goblin slammed forward at them, claws out, ready to tear in. Together they unleash a storm of attacks, and slammed in a perfect, devastating hit, setting off a massive explosion that lit everything up. When the dust finally cleared, that monster was wiped off the map, completely obliterated. And just like that, they finally crushed the black goblin for good. The moment it hit them, both of them went wide-eyed, still in shock that they actually pulled it off. But before they even got the chance to celebrate, then the moment they realized they were boxed in, they snapped back into guard because a whole horde of goblins had them completely surrounded. There were tons of them, and the two of them started swapping ideas, talking it through as they went. Beating that black goblin? Sure, that was a real reward, but Chamber didn't even flinch. No matter how many goblins swarmed him, he didn't even flinch. He'd carve through all of them because he'd just leveled up. Then, out of nowhere, the ground started shaking with violent tremors, and the whole forest was trembling like it might split in two. When they tilted their heads up, they froze. Pure shock hit them like a punch. They looked up, and a giant monster loomed over them, just staring down like it owned the sky. It crept closer and closer until a goblin finally came into view. But this wasn't just any goblin. It was something far more terrifying. It was the king goblin right there, looming like a nightmare. They froze in disbelief when the boss of the whole settlement showed up right in front of them. It lunged forward, trying to stomp on them and crush them underfoot. But the second they saw what one stomp could do, they scattered fast. Because the moment that hit landed on them, they'd be finished. Then the king goblin lunged to snatch them. Chamber snapped into action, shoving Ale back to keep her out of danger. Not her. He was the one who got grabbed and dragged into captivity. He had no way out. Whatever held him just kept tightening, trapping him in its clutches. And he could feel it. If this kept going, death was waiting around the corner for him. Right when he was lost, a voice cut through the chaos and promised, "Don't worry, we'll handle the rest." In the blink of an eye, the king's head snapped off and rolled away from his body, and the chamber crashed down hard onto the ground. He stared in shock because the one who saved him and also killed the king goblin was none other than Jane. He couldn't even process it. Jane just calmly apologized for making him wait, like nothing had happened. Ale lunged toward him, yelling, "Are you okay?" and then immediately offered to heal his wounds. Then Jane stalked right up to him. "And then you slam the extra heal spell on him and watch his wounds vanish in an instant." Ale's jaw dropped as she realized the person standing before her was casually throwing a high-level healing spell. She pressed him hard, demanding to know who he really was. Because not only could he cast that extra heal spell, he also wiped out the king goblin in one brutal strike. Before Jane could even get a word out, a lady cut in and warned him. Those low-level monsters were still lurking nearby. Her name was Dragwell, and just saying it already felt like trouble. Jane told the two of them to rest up, while she and the others dealt with the rest of the monsters. That little moment honestly ticked Chamber off. Like, who does he think he is? Acting all high and mighty. And you can't help but brace yourself for what he's about to do next. Right then, it hit him Nyako's words about extra support were true, and help was finally on its way. He could already tell Jane had grown a ton since the last time he saw him, but he just had to figure out exactly how much. Jane and Drywell charged straight up to the goblins and planted themselves right in the middle. Right when the monsters lunged, he snapped his chain lightning spell to life. With a sharp snap of his fingers, he snapped his fingers and blasted every goblin charging him, electrocuted, sizzling, and wiped out in the blink of an eye. The ones left standing trembled in fear, but that Drywell wasn't about to let any of them slip away. She launched a tiny bomb straight after the one scrambling to get away. Still, a few goblins slipped through and they charged at Jane in a violent lunge, ready to tear him apart. With one lightning-fast swing of her sword, Jane wiped them all out in an instant like it was nothing at all. He sheathed his sword, then flicked his hair into place with smooth, confident grace. He wiped his hands, swallowed his pride, and once more apologized to Chamber for making him wait, while me and Il just stood there, staring at him, trying to figure out if he was seriously for real. Chamber explained what their real destination was, and she shot back instantly. There was absolutely no way that could be true. Later, they all crammed into a tavern and Jane leaned in, saying it had been way too long since he last sat down and drank with him. They used to slam back wild drinks in these insane competitions, and Chamber still couldn't shake the memory. He never once managed to beat them. Now that you mention the past, he quizzed him about what's going on with Martha and Nauru lately, while deep down, he was already praying he wouldn't have to see them again. Jane told him they'd broken up the moment he left too. And the truth hit hard. He'd never really felt like he belonged with them in the first place. Meanwhile, Drywell was still demanding another round of drinks because she wasn't even close to being finished. Chambers' jaw dropped when he finally saw her personality, and Jane quickly snapped it into focus. He wasn't just meeting her, he was teaming up with her as the new Dawn. Chamber grinned and said he'd snagged a totally unique guest for his party. And as soon as he mentioned it, Jane stepped in. She's the dragon priestess, the one who guards the holy sword. He didn't stop there. He kept pushing the story until he told him this. Once he drew the holy sword, she looked up and recognized him as the new wielder. But Chamber? He was completely shattered, because all these wild twists hit like a storm his brain couldn't possibly process. Hearing all of that, he finally admitted it out loud. He'd thought he was killing it up until now. But next to Jane's stories, he was just out here goblin hunting. But then Jane leaned in and swore that wasn't true at all. He could tell he'd leveled up for real. He took down the Forest Blessed One and carved up a Gotland swordsman, and honestly, those were insane wins. But with all that praise raining on him, a wave of shyness hit him. Then it hit him, what he'd just said, and he snapped to attention, grilling Jane. Was that black goblin truly just a goblin swordsman, powered by the evil god's blessings? Jane answered, and he confirmed that. Chamber also realized that had to be the reason he never leveled up, even after he wiped out something brutal and still got 0 experience points. So yeah, for now, he pushed it aside. Jane made it clear his progress wasn't powered by strength alone. He finally understood that once they reported the whole incident to the Rumble Guild, people didn't just cheer for him. They absolutely worshipped the ground he walked on. Now he turned into the one person everybody was desperate for. After he praised Chamber again and again, embarrassment hit him hard like, wait, if he's saying that, doesn't it mean I really must have gotten stronger? And right when Jane said it, she basically told him to stop doubting himself and start believing he can do this. Then he slammed his cup down and told him straight up that he had to talk about something important. Chamber couldn't stop wondering what was happening when Ailes Prentice. They crept up on him from behind. Then boom, every last bit of courage vanished. Turns out she couldn't handle her drink again, and the moment it hit, she slipped right back into her drinking state. He snapped at her to stop, but she just shrugged it off and kept insisting he drank with her anyway. Then he shot Jane a look and asked what she was about to tell him. But when he saw the two of them together, a smile spread across his face and he shrugged it off like it was nothing. He swore he'd work his hardest to keep up, but Chamber didn't buy it, so he grilled him, asking if he was mocking him or pulling his leg. Jokes aside, he swore he wouldn't back down and one day he'd stand shoulder to shoulder with him. And on that note, the two of them erupted in cheers for how far they'd grown. The next day hit, and he was wrecked, full-on hungover and barely standing. Sir Enmi could tell the night before hit him hard, so he shot an apology his way. Then the manager waved it off fast, saying there was no reason to worry, because they were the heroes who saved Rumble City. Chamber snapped that it didn't sit right taking all the credit, insisting Jane was the one who finally brought down the King Goblin. But even so, the guild still praised Chambers and Ailes' achievements, like they deserved every bit of glory too. But then he cut right to the chase and asked them straight up if they were. They wanted out of this town like right now. That left both of them utterly stunned and clueless. He told them Dingle was already getting a letter of introduction ready to hand over to the Buldo Guild. Bulda dwarfed Rumble with brutal monsters lurking right outside its walls. But Bulda was so confident they'd wipe them out and never have to worry again. He could already tell Rumble's monsters weren't tough enough anymore for them. So he leaned in again and asked, "Are you ready to ditch this city and level up to what's next?" Later, the two of them finally reached the gates of Buldo City, and right there, it looked like the trouble was about to start with two. The guard grilled them, asking if they were adventurers. But Chamber just flashed the card he'd gotten from Dingle, and when the guard saw it was legit, he straight up waved them into the city. As soon as they stepped into the city, both of them froze because it was nothing like Rumble. The streets stretched forever, and every inch was packed with people. Like the whole city was alive and roaring. He'd never seen so many wild foods in his life, and every single bite-level surprise left him staring in pure amazement. He just knew this city was about to flip his life upside down. And it all started because Serenity had pointed him in the right direction. They'd also heard the town was carved in two nobles, lived on the east, and the commoners were sealed off behind a brutal high wall. He insisted the best shops had to be over on the east side, and he was convinced that's where all the talented craftsmen were pouring in. He nodded along with her, sure that if they were hunting for gear, they should haul straight to the east side. But then Aya leaned in and demanded to know straight up why he'd come here in the first place. She was convinced he was itching to head out with Jane. He admitted that at first he seriously considered teaming up with him, but he also knew that doing it would drag him back into the same trap, where he'd end up leaning on him way too much. Just like back then, he wanted to grow with her, step by step, at their own pace. And honestly, she was kind of relieved to hear it, so they headed straight for the guild first. The second they crossed into the Adventurers Guild, everything changed. Two gorgeous young ladies swept in and greeted them like they'd been waiting for them all along. Chamber got instantly spellbound the moment he saw them. Ailes let out a harsh cough, yanking him back to his senses. He got so jittery he fumbled through the moment and tried to introduce himself. And then the lady pressed, "Follow me," because she already knew all about him thanks to Dingle's talk, because he was stuck down at Seacrank. She'd already laid out 2 quests just waiting for him. But before he even said yes, she slapped the warning down. These 2 quests were huge, tied directly to the threat Boulder was dealing with right now. He froze a bat, then shot her a question. Wait, is it really that important? Because how on earth were they betting on a total newcomer like him? She just said Dingle promised the 2 of them could never die, even if they kept charging into reckless quests. Then right at that moment, he erupted into furious curses at the old man, clenching his head in rage. Still, he dove into the quests, and they were wild, hit-and-runs on trait caravans, a creepy monster lurking in the northern Boulder, and a kidnapping job tied to wyverns. He remembered how brutally dangerous wyverns could be like, a threat you didn't just shrug off, and it made both of them feel on edge. But they snapped back fast, reminding each other how much they'd grown, and how this was exactly the moment to prove their skills. Without wasting a second, they took the quest. Later, they finally reached the spot where that merchant convoy got hit, and he saw the monster-repelling road was shattered too. Then he glanced at Elise. She looked totally baffled, all clenched up and stiff as a board. He grilled her on what was going through her head, and she admitted she'd been sure they'd have to face the wyverns. His best excuse hit the mark. "I just need a warm-up. I've done this before, but a wyvern is still a wyvern," he said. Because Sernui already warned them this city was way tougher than anything they'd faced back in Rumble. I leaned in and teased him, grilling him like, "So you're really terrified of the monsters roaming this city?" But he wouldn't let it go. Hammering the same point over and over, if they wanted things to work, they had to do something first. Right then, from the wrecked cart dumped on the road, they suddenly heard wild animal sounds. He couldn't help but wonder, was that cart pulled from the convoy that got hit? And he leaned in, peeking inside to figure out exactly what was causing that racket. A round little ball came rolling out of nowhere and blasted him straight in the face. It turned out the attacker was some sheep-like creature, and Chamber was so furious that getting clocked in the face instantly set him off. Ale, on the other hand, couldn't stop himself. He found it ridiculously cute. She couldn't get enough of it. She just had to reach out and pet it. But then her gut dropped the moment she realized something was seriously wrong with it. Chamber snapped and warned her. No matter how adorable it looks, that thing is still a monster. But she marched right up anyway because that thing looked badly hurt. But she shoved her fear aside, coaxing the creature down with soft words, swearing everything was going to be okay. Then, out of nowhere, she felt it, and snapped her wand into her hand in an instant. She heard the bushes crack and rustle like something was creeping right toward her, and the chambered blade stepped up in front of her, ready to take on whatever was coming next. Then bam, they got boxed in by huge sheep-looking monsters. He couldn't stop thinking, were those kids little pals? Or were they with someone else? To their total shock, the monsters started kicking it like a football, batting it around for their sick little game. It felt awful for my little one. And I snapped, "Why are you hurting my Chan like this?" All Chamber pondered that weird name, and he couldn't stop wondering where it even came from. The monsters suddenly snapped their gaze onto them, and he figured these were the very same monsters, zeroing in on the caravan. They came barreling toward the 2 of them, and Chamber snapped into action, taking the lead like he owned the move. And realizing it was just charging recklessly, he slammed the attack right into it. He slammed the monster back and drove his strike deep so hard it practically crumpled. It rocketed backward and smacked every other one in the line right after like a whole ping-pong rally. Chamber couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off, because that attack didn't hit quite right. Something about the sensation felt wrong. Ale couldn't hold back, praised him for wiping them all out with one single hit, but he didn't buy it for a second. Then, out of nowhere suddenly, he caught it. Something was messing with the monsters right in front of him. It started peeling back from the inside, and whatever burst out left them both completely stunned. A terrifying bull-like beast has arrived, and it's closing in, and Chamber realized the soft fuzzy fur must have gulped his hit back when he first struck. Every last one of them had shed their fur, and he couldn't help wondering if this was truly what they looked like underneath. Then the thought hit him. What if that protecting fur is gone? Would they just get shredded by a single hit now? So he put it to the test and told Ale to blast them with her ranged attacks. She hurled her glowing javelin straight at one of them, and that monster went down in a flash. His theory nailed it, so he didn't flinch for a second. He wasn't scared of them anymore. He tore through those monsters, dropping them left and right. Once he finally figured out how to fight them, they didn't seem tough at all anymore, and the two of them wiped them all out like it was nothing. Not even a drop of sweat. They double-checked the cart, found no trace of the caravan, and figured they'd slipped back into the city under the cover of night. He even told them to head back to Boulder City. But that little monster was still there, sobbing in agony. Ale surged toward it and used her magic to heal it. Magic crackled in the air, and Chamber snapped her back again because that thing was still a monster. She finally admitted he was right, but her heart sank because her own kind was turning on it. Yeah, the cruel part wasn't just the attacks. It was the bullying, all because its look and color didn't match the crowd, and she knew that sting of being cast aside by her peers all too well. Her eyes welled up as she pleaded, "Please keep this one close between us." The second he locked eyes with her, he was totally lost for words. He remembered rumors about adventurers who could summon monsters to fight on their side, but that only worked with the Beastmaster skill, and neither of them had it. As soon as the little one was healed and stood up again, it stared at him with glowing eyes, and the system instantly clocked it as a one-of-a-kind specimen. Offered him a choice if he wanted, he could take it as his companion. He nearly froze when that message hit his eyes, while the sheep kept locking on him with those glowing eyes, practically waiting for him to respond. He couldn't believe it. No regular guy like him should ever pull off something like this. Not without the monster tamer skill. But he knew better than anyone right now. Asking his level-up skill for common sense was totally pointless. He couldn't stop wondering if he was really about to team up with a monster as his ally. But then he caught the sheep staring at him, and it flashed him this bright, joyful smile. Meanwhile, Ale was doing the exact same thing too. So he finally threw in the towel and just agreed to take it in. He slammed the confirm button, and just like that, the unique angry sheep was locked into his party, and Ale's face lit up like a firework. The system kept insisting it was a one-of-a-kind species, and that threw Ale off. Was this even different from the Dark God's blessing, since this was the first he'd ever heard of it? Then the system snapped. Name it. And Ale was so determined he could only go with Mai Chan. So he didn't even argue. He just nodded and confirmed that name was next. Then he yanked open the stats window, and the stats on that monster were downright mind-blowing, even though it was only level 1. Its HP was already tougher than nails. He couldn't believe it. And now he realized this monster could actually make a rock-solid tank. But for now, he strode right up to her, grabbed her hand, and shook it like a promise, introducing himself as he did. And it made me ridiculously happy too. With that decision locked in, they hauled ass back to the guild. Later, he spilled every detail to the guild's receptionist. How a furious flock of sheep tore into the merchant caravan. She spotted it beside him and asked, "So that little monster's with you now, huh?" But then panic hit him hard. He had no idea how to explain to her why he was hauling a monster around with him. Before he could even get a word out, she challenged him. "So you can tame monsters too? Or are you just pretending?" With no real excuse left in his pocket, he just nodded and admitted, "That's exactly it." Then she reached out and slipped a ring into his hand. That ring, called the Tainting Ring, was proof the monster had finally been tamed. And Ale couldn't stop smiling, because Mai looked adorably cute with it on. Then she demanded the ring fee, and he figured Of course she'd make him pay for that too. All right then. He slipped out of the guild, and as they hit the street he urged, "Let's head back to the inn for now." Ale couldn't stop thinking, could they actually slip back to their usual routine now that they had Mai in the party too? He figured it'd be okay now that they had the taming ring. If it didn't work, no big deal. It could just hunt down another chance in a city this huge, and just when it looked like he'd get a break, he got rejected by place after place. At last, an old man stepped forward and accepted them. Even though his place looked pretty shabby and it made both of them feel awkward, at least they were allowed to stay there so they could finally breathe. That night, they camped there, and when morning finally hit, it was training time for me. Then they stumbled on a wild deer out in the fields. He was convinced that was the perfect challenge to truly test May's skill, so he leaned in and asked if she was ready. She started shaking her head like she couldn't breathe, eyes wide with fear of that deer. He couldn't wrap his head around why she was freaking out. Because, honestly, the wild deer should have been weaker than those furious sheep. He leaned in and asked, "Does it embarrass you to be terrified of someone weaker?" And then he shoved her hard, trying to kick her into action. But right in the middle of it, she slipped by accident and started tumbling downhill, right at the wild deer. The deer assumed she was about to get attacked, so it snapped first and went on the offensive. He whips her back and flips her up in the air like she's just been tossed like a ball. Chamber and Ale both knew the time was up. They had to jump in right now, right when they were poised to launch their attack. He clocked me dropping out of the sky and straight up crashing down, and she slammed down so hard the whole place exploded in dust. As the smoke finally cleared, turns out she dropped straight onto a wild deer's back and slaughtered it before she even realized what she'd landed on. Both of them were stunned. One wild deer lay down, and May, on the other hand, just stood there, stone calm like nothing at all had happened. He couldn't believe she just shrugged off a wild deer's direct charge, and then she clinched the win on sheer luck. Those tank skills of hers were absolutely unreal, and that single moment proved Chambers' instincts were dead on. She could become a true tank, unstoppable. All they needed now was to spark her fighting spirit. So they pushed on to the next enemy, and Hale's nerves spiked. He asked Mike straight up if he really believed he could take this one solo. He told her she had to face it alone because that was the only way to build real confidence. And look, her opponent wasn't even a real threat, just a slime, the so-called king of the weakest monsters. He pushed her into battles meant to light a spark in her confidence. So he went and faced her against the weakest monster of all time. Terrified at first, she reached for it, froze when it reacted, and then started poking it over and over. Even Chamber couldn't figure out what she was even trying to pull off. But then the slime snapped, pure rage filling the air. Then it lunged straight at her, slamming into her like a wrecking ball, while both him and Ale panicked, terrified she might get crushed. And once again, she just stood there like nothing at all had happened. Chamber stared in shock. She ate a full-body slam without even flinching, and it was just a slime. Now that it latched onto her, she snapped into motion spun like a top and hurled it off her. Then she barreled forward and slammed into the slime head-on. He hurled it so hard it splattered across the rock. Finally, she cracked into a real laugh and confidence surged back into her. Chamber couldn't shake the thought. Was she really a bully, picking on people who were weaker than her? Once she found her confidence, her growth kicked into overdrive and surged at lightning speed, and she charged straight into a swarm of monsters. Though leveling up meant she'd need way more experience than the two of them. Her boost and abilities were straight up insane. She stacked an absurd amount of HP with a crushing damage reduction skill, and suddenly she was rolling in as a full-fledged tank. Soon as they rolled back into the city, even the guards lit up when they saw her. He leaned in, asked how she was doing, and offered her. She handed them a cucumber as a snack, and they instantly fell head over heels for it. At first, it seemed just like that, but it wasn't only them. Almost the whole town ended up loving her, and they started showering her with all kinds of treats. She'd blown up in Bluto like a real celebrity, the kind everyone couldn't stop talking about, and the reason was simple. Those monsters tamers keep close by all looks terrifying and ready to pounce, but May? She had this warm, friendly vibe that made her impossible to ignore, so everyone fell in love with her. Every time they hit the city, getting back to the inn felt like herding chaos, and yet thanks to her, he even cut down on food costs. So yeah, she saved them in more ways than one. Later that night, they crashed into a loud tavern and threw themselves into the chaos. And Ale lit up when they saw the party finally clicking together. While Chamber grinned too because Maya was holding her ground now, and she was shaping exactly the way he'd imagined. Now that they were finally ready, he decided it was time to grab that quest and go head-to-head with the Stumwyverns. Meanwhile, deep in a cave tucked in the southwest mountains of Bluto, a swarm of tiny creatures scattered in panic, fleeing from whatever was coming for them. Turns out that cave wasn't empty at all. There was a dragon lurking inside. Then a cloaked, hooded stranger crept in from the shadows. The dragon snapped its jaws and blasted him with a wall of fire. But that man slipped out of the attack like it was nothing. He slammed down right onto its head. He drove the blade straight into its face and dropped the dragon in a split second. The dragon crumpled onto the ground, dead. Suddenly, the light flared back in its eyes, and it jolted awake again. The story slams back into the chamber and Ale, and they pressed on with the hunt, chasing the Weaver's trail with everything they had. She realized May's energy was crumbling fast. Now that I think about it, they hadn't caught a break in forever. And I can't help wondering if Yazdale was even okay. She insisted, "I'm totally fine," and credited it to the way leveling up had already boosted her stamina like crazy. That's when he started to worry, was Maya burning out because she's stuck at a lower level? So he proposed the brutal fix: force her to level up and scare Ale while they're at it. But yeah, he was just messing around. And they all agreed to call it a break right there. She clocked that he was drowning in his own thoughts, then leaned in and demanded what was running through his head, and he pointed out how insanely weird it was that, so far, this road had barely any monsters at all. Now that he said it, she instantly felt it, too, this same dead quiet vibe, just like the one they hid in the forest of Noi. But he told her, "Don't chew on it," and they crashed out for a bit. Soon as they were finally geared up to leave, they locked in and headed out. Then out of nowhere, Chambers snapped his head up as a deafening scream tore through the mountains. The sound was blasting from the mountaintop, and they couldn't stop themselves. Was it a wyvern or something worse? It screamed like pure agony, like a broken little cry ripped straight from the heart, and he figured something weird had definitely gone down. So the three of them shot after it, gripping the moment, ready to find out what the heck was going on. As they surge ahead, they stumbled into a razor-eyed panther. Leo was right there in the mountains. Chamber couldn't wrap his head around it. What was Leo, a whole panther, doing here? When people swore the monsters in these mountains were supposed to be low-ranked, until now, not a single monster had shown up there. Then, out of nowhere, a sea crank monster stepped into his path, and it utterly stunned him. But then Mai stepped up, and she squared up, ready to take on Panther Leo head-on. He couldn't help but grin. She was sprinting straight into the front lines, alone, and he hiked her up from behind too while she sprinted ahead. Right as the panther, Leo, lunged to attack her from the back, she didn't just come in swinging. She clocked the shot first and slammed it into the wall with a brutal tackle. The chamber practically froze, stunned by how brutally intense that slam was, and he and Ale kept pushing forward, backing her up every step of the way. As soon as the fighting stopped, he leaned in and praised me like I'd just saved the whole world with my bravery. He couldn't help but think, her damage reduction is unreal, because she actually held her ground even against the Panther Leo's claws, and he was already picturing her as the perfect new member of his party. Until then he heard the level-up voice roar in his head. He hit the next level, and boom, he unlocked the party enhancement ability, a brand new thing. He had zero clue what it even did then. A screen blasted open in front of them, daring him to pick which member to boost their party. He had no idea what it would do, so he volunteered as the guinea pig and picked his own name. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted and swallowed him in brilliant light. This light hit him different like. Something inside him just snapped awake as that power surge hit harder than anything he'd ever felt at a level up, and suddenly his whole body felt feather light, like gravity had quit. Right then, a monster lunged up behind him and he grinned, because this was the perfect chance to test drive his brand new ability. He taunted the monster to its face, goading it to rush straight at him. Then it lunged at him, slashing with needle-like hands, but he dodged every single one of them with ease. Because he'd gotten so light, and he could even feel his physical powers getting stronger. The monster shot upward into the sky, and he couldn't help wondering, now that his body felt so light, could he finally fly too? And then he finally realized it right as he clashed with the monster. He launched it into the sky and cleaved it clean in two, instantly ending it. After that, he couldn't resist. He fired up the new feature on Ale too. The moment he picked her name, her whole body lit up green, and she instantly felt raw power roaring through her veins. Then, of course, another monster was right there, begging to be tested with her brand new abilities. And the instant she hurled her light javelin straight at it, its power shot through the roof too, and she couldn't believe what she saw as it crushed the monster in one blast, exploding the moment it hit. Chamber suddenly realized this feature was basically pumping them up with pure power, and he couldn't stop thinking, what would happen if he slotted that boost into me too? Then Ale's eyes caught it. Something was seriously off at the mountain peak, and his stomach sank as he wondered if it wasn't just wyverns up there. He prayed it wasn't worse, but he also knew they had to stay sharp, ready to crash into a brutal fight like the one they just survived with those black goblins. Ale started to feel real worry creeping in. When he spotted that, he told her, "With this party, we can take down a wyvern no matter how bad it gets. If danger hits, we fall back to the city." Ale nodded, and the next morning they set out for the summit. The very next day, the three of them climbed that mountain in a relentless rush until the summit was right there, practically within reach. They ran straight into yet another panther Leo blocking their path. But when he leaned in and stared closer, his blood ran cold, because this mask was nothing like the one he faced before. It had two heads. He decided to go all out sure. He wanted to save his strength for the wyvern, but he knew damn well this wasn't a creature he could afford to hold back against. Ale blasted his sword with radiant light magic, and he barreled straight at the two-headed panther. But then, right out of nowhere, everything crashes before he even gets a chance to move. Something lunged out and snatched the panther's pan out of nowhere, yanked it free in one blazing second. A black wyvern lunged out of nowhere, right in front of them. They'd never even heard of a pitch-black wyvern, and he figured it might be a special situation like the one he'd gone through, just like mine. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. Was it like that black goblin, the one who'd been blessed by an evil god? Hale didn't even want to entertain the thought, but the truth was right there. Maybe it could happen. And one thing was crystal clear. The monster staring them down wasn't normal in any way. So they clutched their courage tight and went all in, fighting with every last ounce of power. The wyvern shot up into the sky, and right when it was about to strike it burned them to the ground with a breath of fire. Ale leaned in and begged Chamber to crank up the party boost for her. The wyvern snapped its jaws and blasted fire breath straight down on them. Flames swallowed the whole area. And then, when the fire finally died down, everything went still. It turns out she'd saved all of them by snapping a magical shield into place around their bodies. Chamber stared in stunned awe, because she couldn't believe it actually worked. Magic barriers just don't survive this kind of punishment. And then, he only pulled it off because the party boost technique turbocharged his whole move. Now it was their turn to strike back. She hurled a blazing light javelin straight at it. He slammed a direct hit on the wyvern even while it was still soaring up in the sky. The javelin slammed through one of its wings, but it still wouldn't fully crash, just groaned and sank inch by inch, fighting to stay in the air before it finally dipped low enough to hover near the ground. Chamber locked in on May and blurted out his plan, begging her to jump in and help him. He hit her with the party boost skill right away, supercharging her physical damage reduction into something way stronger. Then he whipped his sword through the air, charging it with crackling lightning. Me launched into the air, lining up my charged-up sword to slam it into her, because the magic barrier had already built in her resistance to lightning. Then he whipped his sword through the air, smashing that home run and blasting her through the air like she was a thrown ball. He christened this attack Light in Cannonball, and it slammed into the wavering one's face, sending it crashing down onto the ground. Hale snapped at him and grilled him. Was he really about to take her half-joking ideas seriously? The same ones he'd been laughing about while they were drinking? And he shot back that it was a brilliant idea, and that he'd been secretly drilling this move with Mai for a while now. Even after all that, the fight wasn't even close to ending, so he clenched his resolve and kept hammering the monster, refusing to let up. He barreled straight at it, and the monster lunged at him. He juked out of the way and rocketed forward to finish it. He rammed the blade into its already wrecked wing and tore it clean apart, sealing it so it could never fly again ever. But the black wyvern started to twist and shift, and strange rippling patterns erupted across its body. The chamber froze when those eerie green patterns started crawling across its body. And he finally understood this monster was exactly like the black goblin he'd faced back then. Have the patterns matched what he'd seen back then on that goblin? Right down to the last detail? But none of that mattered anymore. Blessing or curse, he sprang into the air and ended it right then and there. Even when he finally scored a clean hit, the sword just clanged off and bounced away like it hit stone. And he was left utterly speechless, like his whole world just stopped. The wavering's body stiffened as he frantically tried to figure out his next move. The monster lashed out at him with a vicious swing of its tail. Just like that, May lunged in between them to shield him, and he refused to let her get hurt. And he jerked her out of harm's way in a flash. Then pain ripped through him instead. Good news, both of them were still alive. And Allah sprinted up to him, slapping on a healing rush to save him. He thanked her for worrying about him, then snapped back that it was pointless, because the wyvern's tail was already laced with poison. Her healing couldn't undo the poison that was already inside him, so he had one shot to stop it before it crawled through his whole body. Hale didn't even know how they'd break through that monster's brutal scale, but then Chamber had snapped into action with a plan, and he dragged me along with him. He ordered Allah to back them from afar. Then the two of them sprinted straight at the black wyvern. This was their last shot to finish everything for good. He kept dodging, slipping past hit after hit as it swung again and again. The monster built up a roaring ball of fire and launched its breath straight at him. Ale cut it off instantly and hurled a light javelin straight into its face. Poison started to scramble his brain. Dizziness hit hard, and he knew he had to rush right now before it was too late. But he couldn't pull it off solo, and he grabbed May's attention and demanded she launch him. She hooked his body with her cushion, like it was fur, sent him springing off the surface, and the next moment, he blasted up into the air. Soaring, he finally spotted the exact spot he'd been hunting for. A nasty wound sat on its head, and even with its whole body turned rock hard, he knew that spot was the real weakness. So he tore the power that had been trapped in his sword wide open. He lunged forward and drove the blade straight into its head. The black wyvern got fully incinerated, wiped out to nothing, and somehow he crushed it for good. But by then Chamber was finished. The poison had already flooded every inch of his body. Right then, boom, they got a message. All three leveled up at once, and every bit of them was fully restored. Ringing with worry, Ali called out to him, demanding to know if he was really okay. Then he shot back to his feet like the poison never touched him, and flashed a thumbs up, shouting that it was finally gone. They were thrilled to hear it, especially once they saw how much loot they'd scored, so he pushed to sell every last bit since black wyverns were crazy rare. And when Ale said there was no way they could carry all of it, he nodded right along. So he turned around and hauled himself back to town, praying the monsters would have thinned out by now. But then, right out of nowhere, he felt the cloaked stranger's presence closing in on him. It hit him like lightning, and chills raced straight down his spine. He tried to pinpoint what could possibly feel this ominous, and his mind immediately raced to one chilling possibility. Maybe it was the evil god's blessing striking again. Before his mind could catch up, he snapped into action, yelling at everyone to stay on guard, because right then, before he even registered it, the man thrust a bare hand into the chase and smacked him straight down. He couldn't believe it. 1 moment was all it took to crush him, and while Alay froze in horror as Chambers' blood exploded across the room,